And thank you all for taking the time out of your afternoon or late morning, depending which time zone you're joining from, to discuss state uses of volunteer monitoring data. It has been a lot of fun putting this webinar together. There's a lot of interest in this topic, and when you look across the United States at all the diverse models of volunteer monitoring, you see fantastic programs and great examples of data being used in really wonderful ways. So I'm thrilled today to be joined by Dr. Joe Lattimore, Jody Arthur, and James Beckley to discuss some of the different models of state uses of volunteer monitoring data. As Danielle said earlier, just want to give a shout out and thank you to Dawn Merritt, the Communications Director, and Danielle Dockersloot, the Clean Water Director at Isaac Walton League of America, for hosting today's webinar. As I said, we are joined today by Joe Lattimore, Jody Arthur, and James Beckley. And to get the webinar started, we're going to start in Michigan with Joe. And Joe is an aquatic ecologist and outreach specialist in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife at Michigan State University. And she provides technical and training support for the Michigan Clean Water Corps, which is Michigan's statewide volunteer lake and stream monitoring program. And she does a lot of fantastic things through my Corps. And as just a personal note, I had a chance to travel out to Michigan a couple of years ago and spend time with Joe to get to spend time with my Corps and see all the fantastic things that they are doing. And it's a great program, and happy to be joined by Joe today. Joe, take it away as the first presenter.
Thanks, Julie. I appreciate that kind introduction. It kind of took care of some of the introductory stuff that I was going to say, so I think we can move on to the next slide. So as I mentioned, Michigan Clean Water Corps, that's our statewide volunteer lake and stream monitoring program. We call it MyCorps for short. And it's got kind of a unique structure. The MyCorps program is a program of our State Department of Environmental Quality, so it's state agency sponsored. And many roles in the program are contracted out to a partnership group of additional organizations. You can see on the slide there, the Great Lakes Commission, Huron River Watershed Council, Michigan Lake and Stream Associations, and my organization, Michigan State University. We work very closely with the DEQ to implement and operate this program, everything from developing protocols to training our volunteers, handling samples, doing sample analysis for water chemistry parameters and so forth, a lot of outreach and education and data interpretation training as well. And we're actually joined today by my DEQ colleague, Marcy Knoll-Wilmus, who will be available in the Q&A session later on today to answer further questions. So we have, as I mentioned, a lake and a stream monitoring program. Our cooperative lakes monitoring program is the older of the two, started in 1974, making us one of the older lake monitoring programs using volunteers in the country. And you can see we handle a whole suite of parameters, everything from Secchi-disc transparency to water quality parameters like phosphorus and chlorophyll, dissolved oxygen and temperature. We also recently launched a new program called Score the Shore, which allows volunteers to do shoreline assessments of their inland lakes, looking at lake health by looking at the shoreline and the habitat that is there. We also look at plants in our lakes. We have an invasive species program called the Exotic Aquatic Plant Watch, and also a more extensive aquatic plant identification and mapping program that trains and empowers volunteers to actually conduct a full survey and mapping of the plant communities in their lakes, both the natives and the invasives. Our stream monitoring program is also fairly long-lived, although it's a bit younger than our lake monitoring program. We started that in 1990. And like most stream monitoring programs, it focuses on biological assessment using macroinvertebrates identified either to order or in many cases family to provide an indicator of the health of the streams in our state watersheds. We also do physical habitat assessments through this program. And then relatively recently, we've added stream flow monitoring and assessment of road stream crossings to our volunteer stream monitoring program. So as you can see, both programs give a whole suite of parameters that volunteers can choose from to best meet their local needs and interests. We provide training and quality assurance. So at that next slide there, we can move on. That's kind of the roles that we play as the implementation team. A lot of training, right? Getting people out into the field and into the classroom to learn the protocols that we've spent a lot of time focusing on to ensure quality assurance and quality control. We place a heavy emphasis on QA/QC, and so we really want to make sure that these data are reliable and accurate and data that can be used both locally and regionally. We also provide grants to support our stream monitoring programs. Our stream monitoring programs are operated at a more a different model than our lake monitoring programs, in that local organizations such as watershed groups handle the day-to-day operations while we play a train-the-trainer role. For our lake monitoring programs, our staff works directly with the individual volunteers, of which we have about 260 individual lakes in the program this year. We also host an annual conference. Now, one of the big questions that came up when we first started planning this webinar was, how are states using the data? And for Michigan, the data are not used on their own for regulatory purposes. However, there are a lot of great state uses and other uses of the data for water resource protection and management. So next I'll share a few key examples of that. On the DEQ side, of course, this is pretty common across many states, is providing information for the integrated report. Both the DEQ biologists have responsibility for assessing and reporting on the quality of the state's waters, and so they screen our MyCore volunteer monitoring data for both high-performing and underperforming sites that merit agency assessment. In fact, consideration of volunteer monitoring data is specifically indicated in our state of Michigan assessment methods. For example, this year in 2017, DEQ will be entering data collected by our volunteers in 2015 and 2016 to go into the 2018 integrated report. And that report satisfies the listing requirements for Section 303D and the reporting requirements of Section 305B and 314 for the Clean Water Act. Now, as you may be aware, Section 303D list includes water bodies that are not attaining one or more designated uses and require the establishment of regulatory things like total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs, to meet and maintain water quality standards. And the volunteer data are used by the DEQ to show whether designated uses are being met. Of course, in our state, they're not created solely on volunteer data, but if volunteer data shows poor rankings, the biologists will use that information to identify areas and reassess and target during their staff sampling season. And then for lake monitoring, the volunteer data are used in those cases where we have phosphorus, SECI, and chlorophyll data to determine a trophic status. And that trophic status is recorded in a database and used by the DEQ over time for management decisions. The public calls on the DEQ on a regular basis to learn about the trophic status of our lakes or overall water quality, and they are often passing that information on to the public. For example, people who are looking to potentially buy property along a lake or looking to fish or otherwise recreate on that lake. We also have a Department of Natural Resources in Michigan, and their interest is largely focused on fisheries. So our Michigan Department of Natural Resources managers regularly take our MyCore data into consideration for development of fisheries management plans and for harvest regulations. Significant reports that come out regularly from our DNR, like status of the fishery reports and large lake special reports, all incorporate our MyCore volunteer data. The fisheries biologists are very interested in the lake quality data, particularly things like invasive species, early detection of new invasive species that may impact the fishery. Our volunteers are on the front line of those efforts. They're also interested in issues like land cover and nutrient additions. As I mentioned before, a relatively new program within MyCore is road stream crossing assessments. It's one of our newer volunteer monitoring programs in Michigan. And as many of you know, poorly designed and maintained road and stream crossings can directly degrade the quality of rivers and streams. Steep slopes at poorly designed crossings and high foot traffic can cause excessive erosion. Stream culverts can increase water speeds, increase erosion, and block fish movement. And so we felt that there was really a strong need for us to understand where problem areas were so that maintenance funds can be properly allocated to update those crossings. And so we've got volunteers that have very recently been working on testing and using a new protocol for assessing road stream crossings all over the state of Michigan. And those data are being shared both within the DNR and the DEQ through our fisheries biologists, our watershed biologists, and non-point source pollution staff. So this is an exciting newer program within MyCore. The state agency is also using our MyCore data in research collaborations. For example, this image shows a collaboration between our DEQ and the U.S. Geological Survey. They're jointly using SECI data from inland lakes collected by our volunteers to validate models using satellite imagery. Based on satellite imagery, these models developed by USGS are predicting the transparency, or SECI depth, of lakes all over Michigan, including those that aren't directly measured. But our volunteer data are used to check the assumptions of the model, to validate that model. And so we're understanding a great deal about lakes all across Michigan based on the 260 some lakes that our volunteers are able to monitor each year, which is really exciting. Finally, I'll also mention local data use. Local data use is heavily emphasized within the MyCore program. When our volunteers show interest or people show interest in volunteering for the program, we say, yeah, your data will be entered into a statewide database, and state biologists and staff will be looking at that and making use of it. But that's not the main motivation. Your main motivation should be your interest in using the data locally to protect your watershed, to protect your inland lakes, to protect the rivers and streams that you care about. And so we provide guidance to our volunteers on interpretation and use of lake and stream monitoring data so our volunteers can become well-informed, knowledgeable stewards of their local water bodies. And this can mean presenting results at community meetings, teaching others about lake and stream stewardship, incorporating data into local decision-making, and much more. So I'll leave you with my contact information, and as was announced at the beginning of the webinar, I'll be available along with my colleague Marcy Wilmus from the Michigan DEQ to take questions at the end of all of our presentations. Thanks.
That was fantastic, Joe. Thank you so much for that great overview of the MyCore programs. For those of you who joined the webinar a few minutes ago or in the recent moments, Joe mentioned that we are saving Q&A for the end of our hour. We're hoping to save 10 to 15 minutes for questions and answers. Only the presenters have audio controls right now, so if you could write your questions in the question panel in your control bar, we would greatly appreciate that. All right, we're going to move along from Michigan to Indiana. And from Indiana today, we have Jody Arthur, the Integrated Report Coordinator at the Indiana Department of Environmental Management. Jody has worked in the water resources field for the last 17 years, spending most of that time telling the story of water quality in her state and working to build bridges between those who collect water quality data and those who need it to make better decisions. She's a founding member of the Indiana Water Monitoring Council and has worked at IDEM's Office of Water Quality her entire career. And for those of you who are looking to set up databases to help integrate water quality data into your state, this is a fantastic template for folks to look at. So, Jody, it's on to you.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Again, my name's Jody Arthur, and my role here at IDEM includes integrated reporting. I help conduct water quality assessments and develop assessment methodologies. And figuring out how to get more data to feed those processes is something I've been working on for, about a decade now. So what I want to share with you today is a result of my efforts and those of many of my colleagues here in the IDEM's Office of Water Quality to build our external data framework, or EDF as we call it. I'll give you a pretty broad overview of the EDF and why we developed it. I'll tell you what I think are some of the essential components of a state program for accepting, reviewing, and potentially using volunteer data. And I'll share a couple of our successes so far. So what is IDEM's external data framework? Well, this is a systematic and transparent voluntary process for external organizations to submit their water quality data to us so that we can possibly use it in our programs. And, you know, we know there are a lot of data, a lot of people out there monitoring our waters. We have a very robust state-supported volunteer monitoring program, 2 of them, in fact, the Clean Lakes program for our lakes and the Hoosier River Watch program for our streams. We also have lots of colleges and universities, watershed groups, and grassroots organizations throughout Indiana participating in water monitoring. So the EDF was designed to pave the way for greater collaboration, to make it easier for these organizations and individuals to share their water quality data with us so that we can help meet shared goals. We all want to protect and improve our water resources, and to the extent that we're sharing data effectively, we can do that better. Next, yeah, okay. So why'd we build it? Well, Indiana, like many states, is facing increasingly limited monitoring resources along with an ever-increasing need for monitoring data. We know that effective water resource management requires data of known quality and a lot of it. And so, you know, when you think about it, there's never really been a better time for citizen monitoring because data is not cheap. And as our funding levels go down, I think that incentivizes a greater use of data from other sources. So one of the key features of our EDF is its tiered system, which is based on data quality. We have 3 tiers based on the level of scientific rigor with which the data are collected, and each of those tiers have specific data quality requirements. And in the context of the EDF, scientific rigor basically means that data collection follows documented field laboratory and data handling procedures, and that the data collection activities include enough controls to make sure that the quality of the resulting data set is commensurate with its intended use. Meaning the higher the stakes are on the decision-making process, the better the data has to be. So now the EDF is not unique in its tiered system. There's a number of states that are using tiered systems for accepting secondary data. There's good reasons for that. For one thing, a tiered system creates a place for all data. So it's inclusive by design, but it also allows the states to set a high bar on data that they'll use in high-stakes decision-making processes. This helps states more easily defend their decisions to use or not use a given data set. And this is a really big deal for states because they can be sued over their regulatory decisions. So as a state, we need to be able to defend those decisions. For people who want to share their data with the state, they know going in what the data quality requirements are and how their data might be used. So that it benefits both parties. So this slide illustrates, let's go back one. Yeah, there you go. This slide illustrates how that idea of scientific rigor plays out in the EDF. And I should also preface this slide by saying that the only way to determine the reliability of a given data set for a given use is through its data quality documentation. This would include things like quality assurance project plans and standard operating procedures. So if you take a look at that middle line there, the arrow going across, you'll see our 3 tiers, and you'll see that from tier 1 to tier 3, you're going in an increasing level of scientific rigor. And that has a corresponding increasing reliability for one or more uses within those tiers. So tier 1, an example of tier 1, there's no data quality documentation provided with the data set, or the documentation isn't enough to perform a data quality assessment. So the state can't really use that data for decision making. However, we also, like Michigan, we can use those data as anecdotal or supplemental information in some of our reporting. Tier 2, the documentation can help us make some sort of a data quality assessment. for at least some of those key data quality indicators like precision or accuracy. And so those data may be reliable for Office of Water Quality decisions that don't have a regulatory impact. They're still not quite reliable enough to make regulatory decisions on, but we do make other decisions and use data in other ways that we can use Tier 2 data for. And also, those are also good for some of that watershed planning and some of those local level uses that Joe mentioned earlier. Tier 3, the data quality documentation associated with Tier 3 gives us plenty of information to perform a complete data quality assessment. And basically, Tier 3 data is essentially the same as what IDEM would collect, and so in terms of its quality. And so, therefore, it is reliable for Office of Water Quality regulatory decisions. The bar is set pretty high on that, but we will, if we get external data from a volunteer organization or some other organization that meets those requirements, we can and will use it in our decision-making processes. So this is just a quick example of some of those Tier 1, Tier 2 uses, Tier 3 uses. Tier 1 would be education and building awareness of water resources, supplementary information for Office of Water Quality TMDLs and integrated report. Tier 2, the data are reliable for prioritizing and planning some of our monitoring efforts, demonstrating success of water quality restoration or protection, screening, things like that. And in Tier 3, again, we can use those for decisions that have a regulatory impact, such as 303D listing decisions, total maximum daily load modeling, and determining representative background conditions for NPDES permits. So some of the other key features of our external data framework, you know, in addition to a tiered system, there are a lot of components that are important to the success of a state framework for accepting secondary data. These include features that make it easier for volunteers and other monitoring organizations to know how to submit their data and to whom. And it's also systems that make the whole process easier. So some of those features include clear guidance, technical assistance, and a single point of contact. It can be next to impossible for people outside our agency who want to share their data with us to figure out how to do that. So if states want to make better use of secondary data, we need to provide good, clear guidance on the type of data we'll accept, how we might use the data that's submitted, and our data quality requirements. So now we've done this for the EDF. We've developed 2 guidance documents. One is a general guidance that people can really quickly get an idea of whether or not their data might fit our external data framework if they want to share their data. And the other is a more technical guidance to walk them through that process if they choose to participate. But even with good guidance, you know, people are gonna be confused and they won't know who, they're gonna have questions, and so you need that single point of contact. My second point here is the second bullet, the streamlined systems and processes. Those are super important. If the biggest concern that states have about using citizen data is data quality, then the second biggest concern is the time that they have to spend getting those data together. Before the EDF, I used to get things in spreadsheets. I even got data handed to me on handwritten data on notebook paper. So, you know, it takes enormous amounts of time to compile all of these data and get them into one format. And so for the EDF, we've adapted templates that our non-point source program already had developed for their grantees. We also cloned a database that our volunteer stream monitoring program uses to allow direct online data entry. So with everything coming in through these 2 systems, the formatting of all the data submitted is standardized, and it makes it a lot easier to gather the data and look at it, to review it. So we're learning as we go. 2017 is our beta test. We're working with 2 organizations on data sharing. Together, these 2 organizations, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Marion County Health Department, together they're providing us a really cool opportunity to test all of the aspects of our system, especially the data submittal processes and our internal review. We're learning an awful lot about the type of technical assistance they're going to need too through these systems. Okay, so the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, They have jurisdiction over a number of reservoirs in Indiana and are very interested in sharing their data with us. Their goal and ours is to get their data qualified for our highest tier, which will allow us to use them in our Clean Water Act assessments. We're working closely with them to figure out, to help them understand our monitoring and data quality requirements so they can match them, and how to use our templates for data submittal. And one of the things we've learned through working with the Corps is that our templates aren't enough. They don't have all the information they need, so we've been revising those to accommodate their biological monitoring data. So the Marion County Public Health Department, that's our capital here in Indiana, and it's the most populous county in the state. They've been monitoring several streams throughout the county for many years, probably going on 15 years now. They collect field data, water chemistry, and macroinvertebrate communities, and we've been working with them to determine the best method of data submittal. We have 3 methods, and we've explored all 3: the online data entry options, data entry templates, and even developing an electronic data interchange customized for them. What we found is that no single submittal process will work with all of their data. So we're going to use a template. We can shift that slide if you'd like. We're going to use templates for the field data. We're going to use an online data entry process for their macroinvertebrate data, and their electronic data, we're going to create an electronic data interchange for their water chemistry data from their lab, which will upload their data directly into our database. So you may be asking, well, those aren't examples of citizen monitoring data, and what I would say to you is that our citizen monitoring groups are definitely still on our radar. In Indiana, like I said, we have those 2 very robust programs, Hoosier River Watch and Clean Lakes program. We are still working on our processes for 2000, and in 2018, we're going to begin promoting the EDF more widely to these and other organizations. We're building out a better technical assistance program from what we're learning right now. And one of the key components will be a tool that will help people develop their quality assurance project plans online to better document their data quality. So our primary goal with this is to help citizen monitoring organizations and others collect data of known quality. And our goal is to kind of move those data out of the tier 1 where there's no documentation of data quality into those higher tiers to make them more usable in a broader sense. So that's about it for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jody. Clearly, so much thought and processes have gone into establishing that external data framework. Thank you so much. Well, we're going to move from Indiana over to Virginia. From Virginia, we have James Beckley, who works for the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. As the Department of Environmental Quality's Quality Assurance Coordinator, James reviews water quality data from citizen groups, public, private companies, and other organizations. As someone who works in a watershed with James, I think it's also important to note that if you have any QA questions or if you want to discuss different methodology, he's always available and accessible to have that conversation. And it's also cool, one of the things I appreciate about James is he comes to this position at DEQ also from a citizen monitoring effort for which he received a Volunteer of the Year award back in the early 2000s. So James, why don't you take it from here?
Thanks, Julie. As Julie was wonderful to introduce, I'm James Beckley with the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, and today I wanted to talk about our monitoring program. We've been working with volunteers for a number of years. The picture that you see in front of you is actually from our latest letter of agreement ceremony that we had back in 2015, where the Department of Environmental Quality, the Department of Conservation and Recreation, the Virginia Citizens for Water Quality, Isaac Walton League of America, and the Alliance Chesapeake Bay entered into an agreement along with the Virginia Water Monitoring Council to basically promote citizen monitoring and work together to help increase support, again, for volunteer monitoring across the state. If we can go to the next slide.
Hey, James, you're coming through a little garbled, so I don't know if you want to readjust your headset.
A little garbled, okay.
That's better.
All right, well, let me know. I'm using a headset. If not, I can call in.
Okay.
So since 1998, our agency has worked with citizen monitors. We began soliciting citizen data back in 1998, and we began offering a grant program at the time. I was actually a volunteer monitor at the time, back when I was in college. And during that time, however, there was a little bit of the state was really new about using volunteer data. They weren't quite sure how best to utilize it. And for a time, a lot of data was being generated and shared with the state, but it wasn't really being used because the state really didn't know how the best way to use it. So in 2002, the General Assembly approved a measure in the state water control law that basically kind of codified the citizen monitoring program and kind of established what it was about, how DEQ is going to support it, and also established some limits on how the data can be used. The agency was tasked to be kind of the lead coordinator and provide technical assistance to the volunteer community in Virginia. We also offered grant funds for monitors, which I'll talk about later in the presentation. And we also have resources set aside for guidance and developing protocols, including a methods manual for citizen groups. And we also established, again, some limits on how the data was used. And similar to the Indiana presentation, we developed a three-level review system.
Hey, James. Your audio is coming through garbled again. So
I'm going to call in.
Okay, folks. Okay, great. Folks, we're just going to hang tight. James is going to hang up and then call back in. And meanwhile, we've been hearing such wonderful stories from Indiana and Michigan. Be sure to write questions in the question toolbar of the webinar. James, you here?
It'll probably take a minute for him to get through.
All right, sounds good. For those of you who have written questions, I want you to know that I can see them, so thank you for submitting them, and for the notes for letting us know that you couldn't hear the audio.
And just to remind folks, we are going to address all of the questions at the end of James's presentation. And if we are not able to get to all of your questions today, contact information for each presenter will be provided to you in a follow-up email tomorrow, so you can always contact them directly with questions that either weren't answered today or questions that you come up with down the road.
Okay, this is James. I'm back.
Thank you, James. We can hear you a lot better.
Okay. I think we should perhaps start at close to the beginning of James's presentation, just to make sure folks can hear him.
James, can you do a review of the codified law around volunteer monitoring in Virginia?
Yes. So in 1988, our agency began soliciting for citizen data. And in 2002, the General Assembly approved a measure in the water quality control law here in Virginia to basically help establish limits on and how the state can use citizen monitoring data, which was a real big help because prior to that time, a lot of data was being generated and shared with the state, but it was unknown of how to best use that data. So DEQ was tasked to be kind of the lead coordinator and to provide technical assistance to volunteer groups and establish the citizen grant program, as well as established, again, some limits on how the data was going to be utilized. And similar to the Indiana presentation, we had developed a three-level program or a three-tiered program. So we can go to the next slide. So in Virginia, we have a three-level program. Level one is there's no quality assurance for those parameters being monitored, or there's monitoring for water quality standards that, or for parameters that we do not have a water quality standard for. And so we use the data primarily for pollution red flags, general education, and just kind of basic background data. Moving on to level 2, there is some quality assurance methods assigned. They have an approved quality assurance project plan, and the methodologies are very similar to what we use in the state. However, there are some differences. One of the notable examples is we have a group, the Virginia Save Our Streams program, that monitors for benthic macroinvertebrates, but they only go to the order level, while our biologists go to the family and now moving to the genus level, which provides a much finer definition of impairment. And so for level 2 data, we use that to, again, education, pollution red flags, baseline data, but we also use it to help prioritize follow-up areas for DEQ sampling, included in the 305B, 303D report that our state generates. And also for things like tracking improvements, such as if monitoring occurs in a TMDL watershed, or to track how effective best management practices that have been installed in a watershed are performing. And then level 3 is where the methodologies being used follow the same protocols that are recognized by our agency. They have an approved quality assurance project plan, approved standard operating procedures, all their field audits that we conduct with them pass, and that data is basically treated the same way as if our own staff had collected those samples. So it can be used for any of the reasons listed in level 1 or level 2. However, it can also be used to assess waters in the 305B report and list and delist waters off the 303D waters list. So as I was talking to you about in the earlier slide, we do quality assurance review of all submitted data. We encourage groups to use approved protocols and quality assurance project plan, and if they have a laboratory that they work with, we usually go in and they either must pass a national laboratory accreditation program, a NELAP, or they pass our own laboratory accreditation if they are exempt from the NELAP requirements. And then, again, the data falls into one of 3 categories. The way we do not use the data as outlined in the reference law right there is we don't use it for enforcement purposes or similar regulatory actions. So if data is being collected, say, from permitted mixing zones and is submitted to us, we don't use the data to determine permit limits for a facility or determine that if they've exceeded their allowable discharge limits, and use that data that will result into a legal fine. We rely on data collected by the Department of Environmental Quality, and we don't use the submitted data by itself to develop a TMDL implementation plan. There always has to be some DEQ data along with, say, level 3 data collected by volunteers. And we have had some really good successes with volunteers submitting that level 3 data and including that in developing a TMDL. Our Citizen Monitoring Grant Program, our state offers about $88,000 a year in grants, and it can cover pretty much any cost that a group may receive, may occur from monitoring, buying equipment, even covering some staff time to coordinate groups, training purposes, and anything else that the group may need, even including things like mileage. The grants range from about $1,000 to about $12,000, but typically they're around $4,000. And it's been a very effective driver for us at the agency, because that has been one of the main tools we've used to get groups to submit that quality assurance project plan and standard operating procedures, because that's usually part of the requirement for those grants. We also offer technical support. We assist with volunteer trainings. Either we lead trainings ourselves, or more often we actually assist trainings with some of the larger organizations. It depends on the resources that the group has available to them. I'm actually doing a training this weekend on a new monitoring protocol for one of our groups in the Ravenna watershed. We developed a monitoring methods manual back in 2002,
2002, and it was updated in 2007. We're actually currently working on videos, training videos, so they can be used as a visual training resource instead of just reading out from a book. We coordinate with groups to coordinate sample site selection to try to avoid as much overlap as possible between our own monitoring program as well as even some other monitoring groups. We've had several instances where we have neighboring groups monitor the same bridge, and we try to spread those monitoring resources out as broad as possible because there are certainly many areas in Virginia that could benefit from monitoring. We also provide online water quality resources. We did have an online database that was managing all the data that was being collected by the groups. We've had to pull that down for some software upgrades, and we're looking to try and get that put together here later this year or early next year. And we provide technical review of methods and quality assurance procedures. For our quality assurance reviews, what we do is we perform field audits, including laboratory audits, to approve and also improve their quality assurance documentation, such as a project plan. We validate equipment, such as testing the accuracy of thermometers being used by groups, testing performance of field probes like dissolved oxygen and pH. And from all this review, what we have seen is that the citizen data often has a greater impact when it's been basically approved by our agency. We've had several occasions where groups have told us that before they got their level 3 certification from us, that when they shared their data with their local officials, it wasn't really being used that much. But when they were able to show, hey, the Department of Environmental Quality considers the data that we were collecting to be as good as if they were collecting it themselves, they were able to get a lot more traction with working with local decision makers on having their data utilized. So we've seen this as being a very effective way not only for us to benefit as an agency to get more data, but also to benefit those volunteer groups to be able to get to have that same data being used on that local level. Over the years, since the 2004 305B report, we've been including data in the biannual assessment report. The picture you see in front of you right now shows the gradual increase of the amount of citizen data. The 2016 report should be available soon, later this summer. However, as of the 2014 report, we were receiving just over 30% data from citizen groups, as well as what we call non-agency organizations that can include local governments, private businesses, even sister agencies that submit data to us. So between the citizen groups and the non-agency groups, we get almost a third of our data from outside of our own monitoring programs. We've been tracking the amount of contributions that we've been getting from the citizen groups. This was due in part to one of our state legislators putting a bill in the General Assembly trying to mandate a goal of at least 3,000 stream miles being monitored by citizen volunteers by 2010. We started tracking that very closely in 2008, and we have definitely met that goal, and we're looking to increase it more. We expect the 2016 report to have probably a near record-breaking year in terms of the amount of stations received, and we expect the mileage as well. But currently, as of the 2014 report, we have just shy of 3,560 stream miles monitored, almost 34.5 square miles of estuary, and almost 25,000 acres of lakes. And that basically, those values that you see there, that reflects level 2 and level 3 data. That does not show level 1 because we do not include level 1 data in the 305B report. And then here's a map showing the locations in the streams and water bodies that were monitored by citizen groups. The purple is citizen organizations. The green is from non-agency groups such as Department of Forestry, Fish and Wildlife, local governments. and then the orange is where citizen and non-agency data were monitoring in the same water body. So we're having pretty good coverage in the western part of the state. We like to definitely increase coverage in the eastern half of the state, and we're looking to do that in the subsequent monitoring years. And just briefly talking about TMDLs and citizen monitoring, we've had many different opportunities where citizens can work with us on developing a more effective TMDL. We have citizen groups provide data to us to help us develop a more focused TMDL. The graphic you see on the right shows one watershed where we had 3 DEQ stations located at Site 4, 10, and 2 that showed high levels of E. coli bacteria. 4 and 10 were located just below major cow farms. A citizen group came in and they used a very low-cost bacteria method called ColiScan, which we helped promote, and they were able to cover 10 sites in that watershed. And because of that extra resolution that we have, we were able to really see just exactly where the problem areas are in that particular watershed. And in fact, the local soil and water district has been using that information to kind of better target areas to try to put in, because it's mostly non-point source pollution, so they've been trying to promote more cost share with the local farms in that watershed near those really high bacteria spots. Citizens have also been very effective at monitoring the performance of best management practices that have been installed and helping with public education and involvement because they are talking basically to their neighbors and not just someone from the state coming in saying, hey, here's a problem. A volunteer can basically go to their local community and say, look, this is what I'm seeing in our water here. We need to do something about it. Back in 2012, we did a survey, and a couple of questions that we asked was about how much monitoring resources were used by volunteers and to try to capture how much worth of data we're getting from volunteers. And we're doing a new survey this year, but our current estimate, which we think is rather conservative, is we're getting about $750,000 worth of data from groups when you account for the number of monitors that we have in Virginia and the approximate sample time that they commit each year, which is about 24 hours. And when you use the national, I think it's about $23 and some change per hour for volunteer time, that comes up to be about $750,000. Each year we invest about $200,000 through staff time as well as the citizen grant program. So we're seeing about at least a 275% return of investment on the resources that we are assigning to promote and support citizen monitoring. So it's been a great return for our investment.
Hey, James, can we wrap up in the next minute?
Yep. I think that's about it. And just real briefly, these are some notable quotes. I'd just like to point out in the last bullet there was a report from the Isaac Walton League where they did a nationwide survey of how states are monitoring their waters, and Virginia was the only state to receive an A at the time for the volunteer engagement because we've been such a proactive supporter of volunteer monitoring, and it's been a great resource for us. And that should be it for me. Yep, if there's any questions, there's my contact information, and you can find our website by just clicking citizen monitoring. We're that good.
Awesome. Thank you so much, James, and thanks for the quick troubleshooting with the audio. Appreciate that. All right, so we're going to open it up to for 9 minutes of Q&A. So again, thank you to those folks who have submitted questions in the question toolbar. And we won't get to all questions, and so please follow up with people individually after the webinar is over. So to get started quickly, of the 3 states on the line today, are any of your data going into the Water Quality Exchange? Or do you have plans to get data into the EPA's Water Quality Exchange?
This is Jody in Indiana. Our Tier 2 data and our Tier 3 data go into our own database, which has an exchange node that can send it straight up to Storette. So any data that goes into our database can go up to Storette. We've not fully tested the external data framework data, but we've retooled our own database to accommodate that. And so as we start getting more of those data sets, we'll be trying that to get it up to Storette. The framework, the infrastructure is there. We just haven't done it yet.
Great.
And this is James in Virginia. Our original database was not uploading to Storette, but we do have plans for that.
Great. James, if you can hear me, we just got some serious, I don't know what that sound is, back on. Okay, so for folks that are wondering about the context of that, please check out the Water Quality Portal. It's the new iteration of Storette as a way of getting data from across the country into a central location. So check out those resources after the call. So a quick follow-up question. In Indiana, Jody, do you know of any specific examples of how community-collected data were used for listing or TMDL development, Tier 3 uses?
Well, we have not used them for that yet. Well, I should back up. Before we built the external data framework, we actually were using some of our volunteer monitoring data for our lakes in our 305B, 303D assessment and listing decisions. That was because we just needed the data to work with those decisions, and it was a new methodology. Now that we have the external data framework in place, we are working with the Clean Lakes program to make sure that to make whatever changes they need to make sure that the data that their volunteers collect actually do meet those Tier 3 requirements. So we're doing that from at the organizational level.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Moving over to Michigan, so this might be a question for Joe and Marcy. There was a question, using data to establish a TMDL often means that the data will impact permit levels. Does that happen in Michigan?
I'm going to let Marcy address that if she wants to unmute herself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, everybody. This is Marcy Wellness with the DEQ. Currently, the data that we use for TMDLs are DEQ data. I do have a coworker that is working on an E. coli statewide TMDL, and for that, she does target, people that are interested in collecting data, and she will review that data. But for the most part, when we're looking at TMDL writing, we're looking at DEQ collected data.
Okay, great. There's a few logistical questions that are popping up in the Q&A. One thing to note is for everyone who is registered and participating in the webinar, you will receive a link of where this webinar is housed. Isaac Walton Lake is recording this so that we can post it after the fact. So if you're looking to share that, please know that that link will be coming after the webinar is over. So another question that's come through, are there any liabilities to agencies with volunteers collecting the data?
I am assuming that this person is asking if there's legal liabilities as if a volunteer were to get injured. Is that kind of what we're thinking there?
Yeah, I would guess, yeah, how do we handle that?
We don't, in Indiana, we don't have any liability there because our program, our external data framework is entirely voluntary. So people either choose to monitor or they don't, and they choose to submit their data, but they're not being paid by us. It's all just a voluntary program. So I can't imagine any scenario in which the state would have any liability there.
Gotcha.
That said, I should add to that, that may be different depending on if they're volunteering through a state-supported volunteer monitoring program. But again, here in Indiana, all of that's voluntary. So we probably wouldn't have any liability in that regard.
Gotcha. James, coming back to Virginia, can you give some example of how the $88,000 in grants are used?
Yeah, we have groups that we have several larger groups that we award what are called coordination grants, and they're kind of serving as umbrella organizations for smaller groups or even individual monitors that are using a centralized protocol. And those are used primarily to cover staff time, to coordinate those particular individuals and groups or subgroups, as well as provide monitoring equipment. We've also had other groups use the grants to cover, again, things like mileage using the IRS volunteer charitable mileage rate, purchasing monitoring kits, paying for laboratory analysis. So pretty much almost anything you can think of in terms of what costs a volunteer group might incur can be covered by our grant program.
Awesome. And then this is probably a question for everybody, but maybe we can start with you, James. One of the questions here is, how did Virginia get to be so proactive, and how can we get other states to get on board with some of the things that you've done? And I would also pose that to Joe and Jody as a way of closing the webinar to just, what are your advice and for other folks that are looking to do more with their volunteer monitoring data?
Well, I think in Virginia, we have such a very large and active volunteer community, and what the agency saw at the time back in 1998 and so is that there was a lot of data coming in, and then there was just no real way to handle and how to use it. And from that, that's where the General Assembly came in and provided that amendment to the water control law that basically codified the citizen program. And basically from there, that's how our state really became very proactive, because it really set those very clearly defined goals and limitations for volunteer monitoring. It helped to codify, again, the citizen grant program, which has been a big driver for supporting monitoring in our state. And so I think that if you can, other states that are interested in doing this, looking at our model is one approach, and getting your state representatives to adopt a similar law could be an effective way of getting your program off the ground.
Joe, Jody, do you have a quick snippet of advice for other people?
Yeah, I'll quickly say, this is Joe, I'll quickly say that one of the things that is really valuable to us is the fact that our program is actually housed within our state agency, which gives us great connections with them, and that we continue to develop and update our volunteer monitoring protocols to mimic and align with the agency protocols, so that the data that our volunteers are collecting are very comparable to those that our state agency partners are doing.
Awesome. Jody?
Well, my only advice, well, I've got a lot of advice, but what I would share with this group is that I think you have to find, if you are an outside group wanting a state to take your efforts more seriously and to become more proactive in that regard, you need to find a champion within that agency, somebody that understands and believes in the value of citizen monitoring data and is willing to put in the work that it takes to get the agency to recognize that more. It's taken us 8 years to build our external data framework, not so much because of resistance, but more just because it's a daunting effort. So you need to get a champion.
Agreed. And just always like to put out there that the volunteer monitoring community is robust and diverse, and we have a lot of wonderful programs across the United States. And I know, take advantage of talking to other coordinators and things like that. I've really appreciated over the years being able to call upon Joe, Jody, and James, the J team, for questions as we've done things here in Pennsylvania. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us for this hour of state uses of volunteer monitoring data. Again, thank you to Isaac Walton League of America for hosting this webinar. And Dawn, do you want to end with any last wrap-up housekeeping things?
No, I would just remind folks that a recording of this webinar will be going out to them in an email tomorrow, along with contact information for all of the folks who participated in the webinar. So if you have questions that we didn't get to, feel free to email them directly to those panelists.
All right. Well, thank you all, and happy monitoring.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.